Good evening, Hercules. If you're just joining us now, we'll be getting started here momentarily. Just bear with us. We'll start promptly at 6:30. For those just joining, we'll get started at 6:30. Welcome to our conversation this evening. Sadly, we haven't licensed any hold music, so there's no way for me to entertain you with some music, short of me humming, which is not going to keep you here. So we'll fill the void with some awkward silence and an occasional wisecrack joke from myself till we get started. Oh, and 6:30 is here, so you've been saved by the bell. Good evening. My name is Ryder Smith. I'm with a firm called Trippepi Smith, and we've been working with the city of Hercules on community engagement and outreach regarding the Victoria by the Bay Landscaping and Lighting Assessment District. We're going to participate in a webinar this evening. It's actually our second webinar we've done. So about 45 days ago or so, we did a webinar that was focused on identifying the issues and fiscal concerns of the Lighting and Landscape Assessment District and providing a lot of transparency and information about that district to the community. That's actually available on a dedicated webpage we've put together all about this lighting district. It's victoriallad.com. And if you navigate there, you can find all sorts of commonly asked questions and information about this. And you will find a YouTube embed video recording of the prior webinar we did, which answered a bunch of questions as well. This second webinar has many of the same, if not all of the same people involved in the conversation. And tonight's conversation is going to kind of focus on the next step based upon council direction that we're going to hear about. Let's go to the next slide. So a friendly reminder, this is being recorded this evening. So primarily you need to know that just because we'll be maintaining a record of this for transparency purposes and ultimately to post that on the website as well to ensure we provided extensive and accurate information to the public as they consider the residents in the Victoria Lighting and Landscape District area, evaluate adjustments to their rates to address the spending deficit or the budget deficit that exists on the Lighting and Landscape District. Next slide. So real quick, I'm going to go around the horn in the order of the slides that are listed here. Just make sure you understand who is on the call tonight. So Dante, if you could just introduce yourself and what your role is at the city, kind of give a little bit more of a 2-sentence explainer on city manager, that would be great.
Great. Thank you, Ryder. Welcome to everybody. I'm Dante Hall. I'm your city manager here for the city of Hercules. I've been here for about 2 years now, and my job is to overall management of the city. I mean, I have a lot of players here that help me with my job, but it's my job to make sure that things run orderly. So thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you for your leadership. And then Mike.
Thank you, Mike Roberts. I'm the Public Works Director, City Engineer. So I oversee the city's infrastructure, streets, sewer, and things like parks, including the Lighting and Landscaping Assessment District. Thank you.
All right. And Ed.
Good evening. My name is Ed Espinoza with Francisco and Associates. Our firm assists the city of Hercules with the annual administration of the city's landscaping and lighting assessment districts and the Prop 218 effort that we're going to discuss this evening.
And Ed, just for context too, your firm, you're kind of a nerd when it comes to these kinds of districts, right? Your firm works with dozens and dozens of these. Is that a fair statement?
That's right, Ryder. Our firm specializes in this and the administration and formation of assessment districts. So we do this all across the state and in Contra Costa County, throughout the county as well. So,
all right, great. And Mr. Brown.
My name is Chef Brown. I'm the maintenance superintendent for the city of Hercules. I am the administrator, I guess you say, of the boots on the ground for the landscaping districts, overseeing the both the contractors and the city staff who help maintain and keep it looking good.
All right, awesome. Ben?
Hi, my name is Ben Fay. I'm with the law firm of Jarvis Fay, and I'm providing legal advice to the city in the creation, or not the creation, the management of these assessments. I specialize in both advice on the constitutional requirements and statutory requirements, and just making sure that we're following all the rules we have to follow.
We appreciate you wrapping us in the warm embrace of being rule followers tonight, Ben. Thank you. And JR.
Yes, I'm JR Vega. I'm with Pacific Site Management. I am the division manager and currently the landscape contractor. And here with me is my colleague, Roman Guzman.
Welcome,
And I
Roman.
assist
Welcome, JR.
Thank you.
JR.
Awesome. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. Thank you to everyone for joining us tonight. So we have a whole spectrum of people that are all involved in helping make sure our districts can be all they can be at the city. And part of our goal tonight is to have them here to explain the factors and items at play, as well as address community questions. So let's go to the next slide. So today's agenda is we're going to do an overview of the Victoria by the Bay Landscaping and Lighting Assessment District. We're going to talk about levels of service and the funding shortfall that we discussed to some extent, certainly in the last webinar, but we're going to remind folks of some of those details if you happen to miss that first one. Then we're going to get into a discussion about why it matters, what we're doing to address these issues, the proposed solution that the City Council has authorized us to move forward on, which is going to involve an opportunity for you as residents of that area to vote, and then to go into a Q&A session. So that's our plan for this evening. Go to the next slide, please. And just to be clear about it, when you are looking at the bottom of your screen right now, you should see two little Q&A bubble boxes as highlighted on the slide. So when we get to that Q&A phase, we'll be happy to answer your questions. You don't have to wait till then. You can certainly start submitting questions now. But unless the question kind of immediately pops with an item that's being addressed, we'll probably get through all the Q&A at the very end after we get through what is about a 35-minute PowerPoint presentation that we're going to roll through this evening. But everybody is welcome to submit a question. You will submit the question. We will take that question in, and we may have some similar questions that were submitted already. So you might hear a question worded similar to the one you're asking. We also had some opportunity to pre-submit questions. So we have a few of those as well, potentially, to work through. Or not potentially, we have them to work through. So just feel free to submit your questions. We look forward to receiving those. And certainly, if somebody can't answer that question tonight, we'll certainly go off and do the research. But it's hard for me to imagine we won't have the right person on the call this evening to answer your questions. All right. So with that, Dante, I think next is up for you. If we go to the next slide, let's talk about mission, Dante.
Sure. So our city council has established a mission for our city, and it's really all built within or with the foundation of transparency. And tonight, what I want to do, or what we want to do, is once again explain the situation to you about the LLAD and the issues. But as you can see, we want to do this because we seek to provide effective and efficient services to the city. And this is part of it. The LLAD districts have been in place since 2002, and so issues come up. This is one, and I thank you guys for being a part of this discussion tonight, and we'll be happy to answer any of your questions. But this is what we do, and this is what my charge is for all of my department heads, is to really figure out how do we provide services to the public in the most efficient and effective way possible, with integrity and transparency. Next slide. And so, like I said, the LLADs are incredibly important for us. They're the maintenance of our street lights, our roadways, and there are some improvements in Victoria by the Bay LLAD, and it costs essentially to make sure the areas are well maintained and landscaped. So thanks again. I'll turn over the presentation to the next slide, but thank you again for being a part of this presentation.
Thank you, Dante. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about what we're talking about specifically here. Mike, let's throw it over to you.
Thank you, Ryder. So there are actually 5 lighting and landscaping assessment districts in Hercules. They encompass the entire city. Virtually all 8,000 parcels in the city are in one of the districts. So the slide before you are the boundaries for Victoria by the Bay, which includes approximately 800 homes. You can break it down, the amenities down by first, the streetlights, which are shown in yellow. And then secondly, the collector streets. So this would be Victoria Crescent West, Victoria Crescent East, and Craftsman. And the district maintains all of the landscaping in the public right-of-way on these collector streets. The rest are residential streets for which the district maintains the planter strip between the sidewalk and the curb and the tree that's in it. Also 2 parks, Victoria Park and Arbor Park. What's important to note is what's not in the district. So that's Shoreline Park, that's all the way to the left, that's zone 10. That is one that goes along the Bay Trail. And then also San Pablo Avenue, which is part of the Major Roads program. So Victoria by the Bay makes a financial contribution to the Major Roads program, but that's handled separately. Next slide. So now we're going to go into some details on the amenities that are maintained in the district. The first one would be, there's, next slide, please, 245 total energy efficient LED lights. So that would be on the, I'm sorry, that would be on the next slide. Thank you. So as you can see, they're decorative. They're called post-top acorn style streetlights. And what they do is they anchor the landscaping by creating attractive focal points. They also synergize with mailboxes, street signs, and posts that are in Victoria. You can see here the post to the left of the street light with a no parking sign. So they all synergize together to create a sense of place. And the LED lights are energy efficient, relatively maintenance free, and have long operational life. So they're very cost effective. Now, adequately lit streetlights do maintain safe neighborhoods and also improve the appearance of property frontage at night. They also keep streets safe for drivers and pedestrians alike. And in night or bad weather, drivers and pedestrians can better see each other, as well as traffic signs and bicyclists. Next slide, please. So on to the collector streets I mentioned. So here you've got Victoria Crescent East. And on the top slide, for example, the district maintains the planter strip between the curb and the sidewalk with the trees in it, as well as the ground cover and the shrubs all the way to the wall on the right side of the picture. Next slide, please. On the residential streets I mentioned, the district maintains the planter strip between the sidewalk and curb in front of approximately 800 homes. Of course, that includes the trees in the planter strip. There's about 4,950 trees in the district that all need to be trimmed and maintained. So the turf is very durable. It's attractive, lush and green. However, it is pretty water thirsty. You'll hear more about that later. And then while the trees have reached a size where they need higher level maintenance, they do provide shade and cool during the summer, and the deciduous ones let more light in at winter, which of course is much appreciated. Next slide, please. So on to the 2 parks, which total 3.4 acres collectively. The first is Arbor Park. So this is from Trellis Bay, South Arbor Bay, towards the bay, 850 feet, terminating at Victoria Crescent West. And if you start at the bottom left and go northward, you've got the gazebo, then you've got a bench and walkway, very nice landscaping, and then you end up underneath the pergola, looking down the staircase at the obelisk monument. So a very attractive landscaping and hardscape. Next slide, please. So the second park is Victoria Park, and this is 750 feet long, starts at Victoria Crescent West and goes to Shoreline Park. As you can see from the photos, it splits Victoria Park Drive, includes trees, grass, walkways, benches, and enclosed areas. At this point, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Ed Espinoza.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. So as the city's public works director just described, the maintenance effort in Victoria by the Bay is quite extensive. And so what has happened over time is maintenance costs have exceedingly exceeded the cost or the assessment revenue that the district can generate. So present day, fiscal year 23-24, the city is expected to incur approximately $630,000 in maintenance costs for the year. And as compared to being able to collect approximately $520,000 in assessment revenue, which has resulted in about $110,000 delta that the city is looking to close in order to secure the adequate funding to continue to provide the maintenance services at current levels. Next slide, please. So what are the driving factors for maintenance in the district and cost? First and foremost, it's the maintenance needs, the maintenance of the street lighting, the landscaping, the neighborhood parks, and the maintenance needs have evolved and can change over time. So for example, the trees throughout Victoria by the Bay have matured. The roots periodically can cause cracks in sidewalks. They have large branches which can potentially fall on cars, onto people, pedestrians, which obviously is a safety hazard. And so due to the trees maturing, the city has had to shift to using a tree trimming company that uses backup trucks or bucket trucks, versus previously all the trees could be trimmed from the ground. So the bucket trucks, this comes at an additional cost, more extensive maintenance, so on and so forth. So that's just an example as to how the maintenance has kind of evolved and changed over time, which has resulted in additional costs. Next slide, please. Another factor has been environmental changes. More specifically, climate change has caused the need for increased watering, increased irrigation, and currently the water costs equate to approximately 30% of the Victoria by the Bay LAD budget on an annual basis. So, the water is a big factor in the increasing costs. Next slide, please. The cost of utilities. The city's water provider is East Bay Municipal Utility District. Their water rates have more than doubled over the last 10 years. Similarly, electricity costs have gone up. And so, these significant water rate increases, utility increases, they're increasing at a way greater pace, way faster pace than the assessment revenue that the city is able to collect. And therefore playing a big factor in this funding shortage that we're speaking about today. So with that, I'd like to turn over the presentation to the city's maintenance supervisor, who's going to explain why this is so important to property owners in Victoria by the Bay.
Thank you, Ed. Next slide, please. Victoria by the Bay has very lush and green landscaping, majority of which is turf and shrubs and trees, as both Ed and Mike stated. These do use a large amount of water to keep them that way. They also require a decent amount of maintenance to keep them looking prune and maintenance, which adds to property values. If the funding is not there to provide for the maintenance and upkeep of these, it could definitely cause the landscaping and such to not look as nice as it does. Grass would not be as green, trees would not be as healthy looking. And as they stated, the trees are becoming a larger factor with their size. The pruning of it is becoming a larger thing. The seasonal pruning in Victoria by the Bay is just getting ready to start as we speak. Next slide, please. And there have been questions that have been brought up in the past about the possibilities of changing some of the landscaping in Victoria by the Bay to something that is possibly more drought tolerant, drought friendly, less water uses, or maybe even lower maintenance. Part of the problems with a lot of this is the cost that can be brought down just by making those changes, the design, the irrigation changes that may be necessary, the physical aspects of removing possibly trees or other things that would help us get to that point those costs may almost outweigh the ongoing maintenance costs, which makes it really highly unfeasible, especially considering there's not a lot of backup funding to pay for these large upfront items. Next slide, please. And the big picture is for the residents of Victoria by the Bay, the landscaping the way it is when you drive through Victoria, it's a wonderful looking, attractive neighborhood, and keeping it that way is the city's big goal and making it a really desirable place to live. Next slide. And I think that maybe on to a next panelist. I apologize.
Yes, sorry, Ben, let's throw it to you so you can discuss the democracy of voting on lighting and landscape districts.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Ryder. So under Proposition 218, which is a provision of the California Constitution, these proposed increases in assessments cannot be implemented without the approval of the property owners who will ultimately be paying them. And so, as I'll be explaining later, you have all been sent, property owners have been sent ballots, and I'll explain the process for voting for or against the proposed increases that will decide whether the city has the power to actually do these proposed increases.
All right.
And I'll pass it on to Mike Roberts.
Yep. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you, Ben. So as far as the efforts from the city to date, next slide, please. So before staff recommending looking at a cost increase, the city did commission Baker Tilly, an independent third party, basically to audit our activities because we wanted to make sure that we were being efficient. And they concluded that the district is being maintained well, that they recommended rates be increased so that it's financially sustainable. And once that occurs, then look at options such as potentially changing out the landscaping to more drought tolerant landscaping, but to get the financial order in place first. And then the city also hired Francisco and Associates, and their recommendations and report was presented to the October 10th City Council meeting, which included, next slide, please, a resolution authorizing Proposition 218 proceedings. This is to go to a ballot to raise rates, approve the preliminary engineers reports, which included the recommended rate increases, and then also declared the council's intention to levy at these new rates in 24-25 and also 25-26, and then set the public hearing for the rate increase for a special meeting on December 5th. Now back to Ed.
Thank you, Mike. So the proposed solution, as the city's public works director described, the city's proposing to increase assessments for the Victoria by the Bay LAD. Those assessments are memorialized in the engineer's report that has been recently approved at City Council. And what that assessment looks like, that assessment increase looks like, is on the next slide. Thank you. What is that assessment increase? The city's proposing a two-step fixed increase of $150 per year, or $12.50 per month, to the Victoria by the Bay LAD assessment, which would go into effect for next fiscal year, 24-25, which first installment of the increase would be reflected on the property tax bill due December of 2024. So we're a little over a year away from when that increase would be reflected on property tax bills, should it be approved by property owners. So the first increase will go into effect fiscal year 24-25, first installment due December of 2024. The second fixed increase of $150 would come in the following fiscal year, 25-26, with the first installment being due in December of 2025. Then commencing with fiscal year 26-27, so 3 years from now, the assessments would go up by the Consumer Price Index published by the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, as they do now, to keep up with inflationary increases in maintenance costs. Next slide, please. So what does the total assessment look like should the assessment increase pass? Property owners in Victoria by the Bay, as you see in this table before you on the slide, current fiscal year 23-24, all single-family homes pay about $603 per home. There is a deed-restricted apartment complex within the boundaries of the Landscaping Lighting Assessment District. That apartment complex, the property owner there pays about $181 per apartment unit. So it's not, per lot there, it's per apartment unit. And I believe there are about 130 or so apartment units associated with that complex. But so present fiscal year 23-24, single family homes pay about $603. After the first fixed increase of $150 in 24-25, property owners, single family homes would pay about $753 per year. And the following fiscal year, 25-26, property owners would pay about $903 per year per single family home. And then the following year, as I mentioned on the previous slide, assessments would continue to increase by the Consumer Price Index as they do now. Yep. Next slide, please.
Yep.
So
let's get on back to the details on the voting process. So I think, Ben, this is going to come back to you.
Yes, as I had mentioned earlier, for these proposed assessment increases to be implemented, they have to be approved by the property owners of the district. Next slide, please. So if you're a property owner, you should have received by now a notice of a public hearing on December 5th, and importantly, a ballot that will have within it a self-addressed stamped return envelope and the ballot in which you can indicate if you are voting for or against the proposed increases. Next slide, please. Here's an example of the ballot. Filling it out is quite simple. You either check yes or no on the box you see up the top left there. And importantly, you have to sign. Signature, you have to sign your name and then print your name to the right of that. That's very important for the return. Next slide, please. So for it to be counted, you fill out the ballot, check the box, yes or no, sign it, print your name, and then you have to get it back in time. You can put it in the mail in the self-addressed stamp envelope. Make sure you allow enough time for the mail for it to be delivered. Postmarking it before the hearing on December 5th is not enough. It has to be received by the city by 5 p.m. on December 5th, or you can bring it to the hearing and hand deliver it to the clerk. As long as the clerk gets it before the end of the public hearing, it will be counted. Next slide, please. And that's pretty much repeats what I actually just was describing, how you get it back. And again, it's very important. It's simple. You've received it in the mail, check the boxes, sign it, print your name on it, make sure you get it back in time. You can bring it yourself or you can put it in the mail as long as it's early enough. Next slide. Again, 5 p.m. December 5th, that's when it needs to be received, or hand delivered to the city clerk before the end of the public hearing. Next slide, please. So when will they be counted? They will be counted. They will start counting it after the close of the public hearing. Importantly, as they're counted, they're weighted. So in this case, that doesn't make a huge difference because they're largely the same for all the single residential units, but you do have a different one for the deed restricted. They are weighted. The more that a property owner has to pay in the assessment, the more the vote counts. $1 equals an equivalent increase in the weight of the vote. Next slide, please. And only after counting the votes and weighting them appropriately, if there is a majority protest, if there are more votes against, more no votes than yes votes, then the city council cannot proceed with the proposed increase and the current assessments will remain in place. And that is essentially how the voting works. Next slide. Probably we'll know the results the evening of December 5th. Generally, these are counted that same evening. They're counted in public. So that's another important thing, is the public can observe and make sure they're being counted properly. And actually, for a period of 2 years after this vote, the ballots have to be kept and they're public records. So anybody can check and make sure that this was done exactly, that was done correctly.
Great.
That's my summary. Back to you, Ryder.
Thanks, Ben. Appreciate the summary on this highly localized form of democracy and local government. So we're going to enter the Q&A phase here, and I appreciate we've already gotten several questions that have been asked. There are a couple questions I want to just indulge in real quick to clarify a couple items that were discussed, and maybe for my own edification too. Ben, you had referenced that property owners will be getting ballots. So if I'm a renter somewhere in the Victoria Lighting and Landscape District area, I won't get a ballot, but instead the person who owns the property that I might be renting will get the ballot. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. It's tied to the property owner because it's the property owner who has to pay the assessment. The assessment bill also comes to the property owner.
And that assessment bill comes in the form of the property tax bill that people get at those properties. So people have been paying this now. It's been paid on the property tax bill?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Mike, a different question. I just wanted to clarify on Baker Tilly. Who is Baker Tilly? The Baker Tilly did this assessment to help you guys make sure you were operating efficiently. And I'm just, for the sake of the audience and clarity, who is Baker Tilly?
Yeah, so Baker Tilly is a company, with a frankly sterling reputation and is well known for providing consulting services to government agencies. Generally, they consist of retired city managers, public works directors, county executives who have a career of experience in their field, which then they bring to bear for the issue you have at hand. So in this case, the person who did the assessment was both a finance director, public works director, and city manager.
So a good holistic perspective from an outside perspective and based upon their experience. I certainly know Baker Tilly. They've worked in hundreds of city governments throughout California providing advice. So they know of that which they speak, certainly, from what I've been able to tell.
Absolutely.
Okay. And their observations and findings were presented as part of a staff report?
Yeah, and certainly that's available as well publicly for anyone who's interested in receiving a copy. Just reach out to me. I'd be happy to email it to them.
Yeah, and one thing I will note, we have a concluding slide on this as well. In fact, if you want to go to the very last slide real quick for my team that's managing the slides here, I'll just preview this particular slide that if you have questions and you want to email Mike Roberts, his email address is right there. If you have questions, you want to talk to Ed Espinoza, he's made himself available. And obviously we have this website, victoriallad.org, that can also answer questions. So this isn't me punting on the questions we're going to get tonight and answering those, but I just also want to emphasize for the audience that we are genuinely trying to get as much information as we can and answer any community questions and concerns, because frankly, this is kind of esoteric stuff in the scheme of things, right? A lot of people, when we go through processes like this, they didn't even know they were in a lighting landscape district because they don't look at the property tax bill very often. And all of a sudden they're like, oh, this is a thing. So we're trying to make sure we answer all those questions. One other question, maybe Dante, if you could answer this. I think Mike had mentioned there were 5 lighting and landscape districts throughout the city. And nearly every city residential address is in a lighting and landscape district. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, I was on mute there. Yes, that is.
No problem. And then I guess the second question that I would have is, in your experience or awareness, and obviously you've only been with the city for a couple of years now, but this isn't the first lighting landscape district that's had to go through a rate adjustment in the city. Is that correct?
That's correct. And, like we said in the presentation, we have to adjust for CPI. We generally provide council with an analysis and they make a decision each year. But we've had trouble before in other districts, and we've had to go through a process of figuring out how we were going to afford services in other districts. So this is not the first one.
All right. And the deficit that was incurred in the most recent fiscal year, I mean, the bills got paid, right? We weren't not paying bills to maintain services. Those bills were being paid though. Are they paid out of the general fund?
They are. And if you can imagine, we do budgeting every year, and budgeting is based on a projection of the revenue we think that's going to come in and the expenses we believe that we will have to pay in that next year. We have control over a lot of that, but some things we don't have control over, such as utilities and water and things like that for the city. And that's mainly because a lot of those rates are set outside of the city, and they include things like contract negotiations or what have you of those different agencies. So the city does not have a lot of control over those. However, we are obligated to pay the bills. We can't let the city go into any type of deficit or get penalties for not paying the bill. And so what we do is we cover it with general fund if it's beyond the projection that we made in the budget. And so that's what happened in this case, is the utility expenses were a lot higher than we thought, essentially, or that we had budgeted for the assessment district, but the bill had to be paid, and we paid that with general fund.
And is it generally the case we treat that effectively like a zero interest rate loan to the fund in order to cover it, and then we eventually try to recover to get back to even with the general fund budget from that lighting landscape district?
That's exactly what we do, and we have initiated, repayment loans for different districts, but that's what we treat it as is a 0% interest loan that we get paid back through the district over time.
And I assume that this is generally driven by a city council philosophy that it's not fair to subsidize any one district, and that the equitable approach is to have each district stand on its own fiscal feet, since theoretically the services in that district are benefiting the people that live in that district, i.e. lights, green belts, parks, things of that nature.
Absolutely. It's as a taxpayer, if I were not receiving the benefit of something in the city, I don't think I should have to contribute additional money to pay for those things. And so the city council has adopted a policy of just equity and fairness, of the benefit that you receive. We want to charge the districts and the areas that receive that benefit those charges that they receive the benefit for. So that's exactly correct.
Right. And Mike, in the history of this particular district, Victoria Lighting and Landscaping District, roughly when was this district formed, and have we ever had to do a rate adjustment outside of the CPI adjustment?
Great question, Ryder. So the district was formed in 2002. So it's been, in place for, well over 20 years. Yeah. We've been able to keep expenditures within the budget, allowing for a CPI increase each year, but have never had to go to a rate increase by Prop 218, a balloted measure. So this is the first time for Victoria, but there's been half a dozen other instances in the city where we've had to do it. And actually, it's kind of unusual, frankly, to have gone for 20 years without having to do an increase above the CPI.
So I guess what I'm hearing is, compared to other lighting landscape districts in the city, this one's survived for a pretty good period of time before having to actually make a rate adjustment.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, like as mentioned, it really comes down to utilities, more specifically water, which has doubled in the past 10 years. And with the changing weather patterns, we have to use a lot more water in summer now. That's kind of a double impact there. And then the trees have just gotten so large that we have to come out with a tree trimming company and a bucket truck. And so those are all new expenditures for which the district doesn't have the funding to cover.
Yeah, I could certainly, one of my other entities I get to work with is the largest tree trimming firm in California. I can certainly attest to the difference between trimming a branch from the ground and trimming a branch from a bucket truck. It's a totally different operation. But people like big trees. I like big, beautiful trees. They look beautiful. I certainly like the ones in my neighborhood. That actually kind of provides an interesting segue to one of the first questions that was posed to this evening by an audience member. The question is, do we already have the LED lights? So that's the first question. I believe the answer to that is yes, right? The lights are all already converted to LED. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. And then the following question was asked, if so, if they are energy efficient, why are we having a shortfall? So Mike, could you clarify where the shortfall, you started to allude to this, but why don't you bring it home and be very clear about that?
So PG&E rates have exceeded the CPI. However, the overall cost isn't that much. And because we converted to high pressure sodium to LED streetlights, it's lessened the impact to that. But again,
and sorry, Mike, if I just clarify, when you say we went from high pressure sodium to
streetlights,
LED, instead of doing traditional incandescent, we were already using a somewhat more efficient light, and then we went to LED. So the gap in increasing efficiency was less significant than if we'd gone from the old school incandescent.
Yeah, so the impact from PG&E was lessened by the fact that we went to LED. And then overall, the cost for electricity is significantly less than the cost, for example, for water now, and also combined with tree trimming, which we didn't have money set aside for in the past. So in comparison to the increases elsewhere, while there's been savings going to LED, that hasn't had such a large impact on the overall budget.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Next question is being asked is, are we being charged for the removal of the poplar trees? I think maybe Jeff, do you know the answer to that question? And you are muted, Jeff, as a friendly reminder.
It's actually kind of a two-part question. The majority of the poplar trees, which people have probably seen removed around the entrances to Victoria by the Bay, Victoria Crescent East and West, actually were on HOA property, and that whole project was done by the HOA, not by the lighting and landscaping districts, not by the city. There have been a few places in Victoria by the Bay where the city has had to remove some poplar trees, and those costs, of course, were carried by the lighting and landscaping district.
And so the city's landscape contractor who's on with us tonight, they're the ones who executed that removal work?
Sometimes yes, sometimes we've had to go to outside contractors, tree type contractors. As a matter of fact, I want to say the majority of poplar trees that the cities had to remove, which is not a large number, has been done by outside contractors, not our landscape contractor.
Okay. And then I guess a related question, just for clarity, why are the poplar trees not so popular? What gives? Why do poplar trees have to go?
Poplar trees, and Michael will have to help me out a little bit with this if I get it wrong, but when the development was developed and built by the developer, poplar trees were planted because they grow fast, they provide windbreaks, and you get some good greenery out of them very quickly. What we found long-term with them is they also have an effect they can do damage to sidewalks and get into the fence structures and things of that nature. So their root structure can start doing some damages. And tree species are one of those things that over the years, it's a moving target. The tree that is thought to be a great tree this year can sometimes be decided to not be such a great tree 10 or 15 years down the road. There's a huge amount of work was put into the planning and design of Victoria by the Bay. I'm not a planner, so I don't speak like one, and I wouldn't quite say, I don't know that I'd go all the way to say Victoria was a planned development, but it really was, landscaped, and everything was worked very hard to make it look the way it does now.
Okay. Did Jeff do okay on that answer for you?
Yeah. The poplar trees are frankly, I think I would use the word terrifying. So first of all, the city is heavily committed to trees. As I mentioned, there's almost 5,000 trees in Victoria. So trees are seen as a very positive thing for which the city invests in, works to trim and take care of. But there's some species that become really troublesome. So the poplar trees, if you cut them down, the roots all sprout new trees. If a limb breaks and blows away, It germinates into the ground. It also has pods. So they're really difficult to deal with. The triggering event, frankly, was, as Jeff mentioned, having the roots heading towards patios and people's backyards and also on sidewalks and stuff, and just wreaked a lot of damage. So we really were forced to address them.
Yeah. And this is, by the way, one of many species that cities are having to mitigate across California that have caused problems and concerns. So it's not to pick on the poplar tree, but it certainly is one of a kind of a cadre of trees that are problematic. Thank you for indulging me with our horticulture 101 discussion on that particular front. Okay. Next question. I think, Ed, I'm going to turn to you to answer this one. If the new rate passes, we won't really know what the payments are in the future past 2026, since they're going to be indexed. So does only going by the index rate increase leave us open to charges that we can't change in the future? And I guess the question would be, can't change in the future, meaning if we're indexed to the CPI, then every year we'll have an adjustment up of whatever CPI is, which historically has been somewhere between 2% and 4%, but obviously the last couple of years of inflation have been closer to 6 to 8%, certainly from what we've seen. So is that when we say CPI adjustment, essentially is that the peak, the max amount that it could increase each year, or is that locked in what it will increase every year?
Yeah, no, that's right, Ryder. The assessment, the exact assessment increase is not known at this time. So it would track with the consumer price index that is published by the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. So in the future, any property owner, any interested resident can go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics website, pull the index, and and see what that increase is. And what it's intended to do is increase with inflation, right? Because as we all know, especially this year and last, costs go up, and the city is no different in terms of maintenance costs and water and utilities and all that. So the intent behind allowing the assessments to increase by the consumer price index is to track with inflation. With that being said, it is an average inflationary figure, and there are big components of the city's LAD budget that increase at a faster pace or a greater amount. Water, case in point, because as the city manager mentioned, the water rates, the increases to the water rates is out of the city's control, right? So the city does not control to what degree they increase. But so beginning in fiscal year 26-27, they would go up by the CPI, the Bureau, the published index. That number on average in the last 20 years has been about 3%. With the last couple of years, as you said, Ryder, have been, obviously an anomaly in the 7 to 8% range. But historically, in the last 10 to 20 years, it's been in that 3% average range there.
And so I guess a related point to clarify too, like you referenced the fact that the water rates, which water cost, the actual acquisition of water, is a pretty substantial cost component of the lighting and landscape district. Those rates have actually been increasing above the CPI rate over several years. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So in the last 5 years, the cumulative increase has been over 40%. And as compared to the allowable CPI for the LAD, it's been about half cumulatively. So that difference is very significant, especially when water is about a third of the budget, right? So it carries a very heavy weight there. So yeah, it's been much greater, Ryder, to answer your question.
Okay. Mike, there's a question here noting that a lot of the photos and information was focused. It's described as West Development. It's all part of the Victoria development in general and intended as amenities for that district. The question is, how will these improvements also address the East development, which I assume is the other side of the major arterial, of which all of Victoria Gardens is part of that footprint?
Yeah, so thinking back here, actually the slide showing the collector street was Victoria East, which was on the east side, and so was the planter strip. And I think they're pretty evenly distributed throughout the whole district. Pretty much every house has a planter strip in front of it with a tree. And then as far as, for residential streets, and then for the collector streets, you have Craftsman and Victoria east of San Pablo, as well as Victoria West. And those maintain across the entire right of way. So the streets and the planter strips and the trees are all pretty evenly distributed. But it is true that the two parks are northwest of San Pablo. So that just happens to be where they're located.
And those are two of the most available parks or most easily accessible parks for the residents on the east area of the Victoria development. Is that correct?
Those are northwest of San Pablo. So they have to cross San Pablo. That's just simply the way the development was laid out.
Well, okay, very good. Thank you for clarifying that. Mike, another question here, which is, other than CPI, are there any other plans to increase fees after the first 2 years?
No, there are no other plans to increase rates at this time. We will, be looking at new technologies moving forward to see if there's ways for us to overall improve cost efficiency. So we're not going to sit idle either, though.
Okay. When you say sit idle, what do you mean by that? Not sit idle?
Simply increase the rates and continue to do business as usual. As I mentioned, based on the Baker-Tilly study, once the finances are in order, the recommendation is we look at potentially, for example, alternative landscaping that's less water thirsty. So we'll always be looking out into the future for ways to be more cost effective.
Right. And I think one observation, I guess, that would come to my mind is changing out landscape requires capital investment to make that happen. So when you're running out of deficit, it's pretty hard to make that happen. So I think what I'm hearing you say is, if we can get the fiscal ship figured out, then we're in a better position to make those kinds of long-term transitions. Is that fair?
Yeah. So, for example, since we're talking in some detail here, we figure it's about $1,500 to change out the planter strip in front of each home to hardscape or, low water usage plants. And there's 800 homes out there. So that's $1.2 million. So you'd need that upfront capital cost to change out the turf to drought tolerant landscaping. Potentially, though, we can get a rebate through East Bay Municipal Utility District, which is the water provider. And also we'll be looking for grant opportunities as well.
Right. So leaving no stone unturned in order to try to mitigate these costs going forward as much as possible.
Absolutely.
No. So one of the areas that sometimes comes up as a question here, and it was a question that had been asked previously, which is to our good friends J.R. Vega and the landscaping company. Is that contract rebid, or are we getting as much value as we can out of it for the community? So when is the current contract up for the existing provider, and was that being discussed?
So, Ryder, maybe I should jump the line.
Oh, sorry,
here.
yeah, that was a question for you, Mike.
That's okay. So frankly, staff's been really happy with Pacific Site. We had an experience prior to Pacific Site where we bid the contract out and we awarded it to the low bidder, and they were unable to perform for what they had bid out. It was a very difficult year and a half. So lesson learned moving forward, we've actually put together a new contract to bid out that would be based on bid, but also performance. So it gives the city the latitude to award it to the best service provider, not necessarily the one who puts the lowest number on the bid. So based on the Baker Tilly study, the recommendation is we go out to bid with that, which we intend to do here in the near future. And we'll simply see how that goes and how the bids come in.
Okay.
So I'm sorry, one last thing is,
Please.
yeah, as I mentioned, they've been operating under the current contract for 5 years with no rate increases, including CPIs. So it was staff's attempt to keep costs down and not frankly have to raise rates outside the CPI, but it became untenable. So there is some, I think, pent up financial demand on the contract.
Yeah, well, that's fair, especially given the inflationary environment, and good of the landscape provider to have mitigated those costs without having those annual increases. Certainly helpful to the lighting and landscape district.
Yeah.
Ben, clarification on the voting process. So ballot shows up, it's there at my house. You know, let's say it's a couple that owns the house, tenants in common or whatever the legal term is. Only one of them gets to vote for the household. Is that correct?
If you have shared ownership, your vote actually could be apportioned between the amount of the shared ownership. So if it's 50-50 ownership, for example, then your vote, you each get to vote half. So you could have one vote yes, one vote no. You do need to provide some information if you're doing that, showing how it is to be divided. It's unusual, but it does happen.
Okay. Well, it's always good to know that your spouse can cancel your vote. That's always a winning strategy. Make for some lively conversation over a glass of wine in the evening.
I should also add it is possible to change your vote up to the time of the hearing. You can change your vote if you decide you've changed your mind on it.
Okay.
Again, not very common, but it is possible.
And I guess one other thing to emphasize is that it's not the role of the city here to tell people how to vote this evening. Our job is just to provide as much information as possible to people, for residents to make an informed decision about a pretty esoteric area. So that's why our information is we're trying to be very fact-based. So I guess one other fact-based question I would just ask is maybe perhaps an obvious one, which is what happens if people vote no, right? Dante or Mike, would you guys entertain just...
Sure. Let me see if, okay, Dante's nodding, so I'll start and he can refine my answer here.
Or why don't I start? Okay. You can refine. Mike is a good detail guy, and I'm pretty plain and simple, and he provides a lot of the detail. In actuality, it's a serious issue, right? Because we have a deficit that's being paid now by the general fund. And the reality is, if it doesn't pass, then we have to come back to the drawing board and figure out how we can live within our means, how we can live within the revenue that's generated, and what the assessment district can afford, which will mean a reduction of service or a different way of doing things. But we're not there yet. We have to have a number of different conversations. We need to involve our city council in discussing this and providing us with direction, but it likely will mean a reduction in the services. And with that, Mike, if you want to fill in.
I think that's a pretty complete answer. All I'd add is we're proceeding, with the understanding at this point in time, all our efforts going into just reaching out and communicating information to residents. When I started work at Hercules, Jeff took me out, drove me around, and brought me to my first week, Victoria, and we went up to the top of the staircase, and we looked at the park, and we looked out at the bay, and we saw Marin. It was incredible, probably the nicest landscaping I'd ever come across. So I think tonight, at least, this effort is to just continue that level of service forward, given what the landscaping does, for Victoria by the Bay. So that's really most of our effort, I think, at this point, rather than switching over to the what ifs.
Yeah, fair enough. I don't have any additional questions from the public that have been asked. Is there anything else that Dante, Mike, you guys, Ben, as the defender of democracy this evening, you got any other closing items or remarks you need to make? Otherwise, I'll go through my closing slides.
I don't have anything to add. I mean, this is very local democracy. There have been concerns recently about, whether votes are being counted or not. This is a very transparent process. As I mentioned, the ballots are kept for 2 years, and people can check them. This is very open. It's very easy to vote, yes or no. You're sent your ballot, and that will determine it.
All right. All right. Well, the concluding slide I have is up on the screen, right? In that spirit of transparency, Mike is the man when it comes to public works in the city. He's got his email address, his phone number right here. He's available to answer questions from residents and constituents, property owners in the city. Ed is the lighting and landscape district nerd, as I like to refer to him, and he's never beat me up for it. So I'm going to keep saying it until he reaches through the screen and grabs me. But he's an expert in this space and can answer like this. We aren't the first district to face these challenges by his experience, certainly, and won't be the last as we work through these issues. And he's got deep understanding and experience in how this is going to work, and will be throughout this project through the voting process. The city's put together a bunch of information at victoriallad.org, which we encourage residents to go visit and check out. This recording is going to be available for residents to get their questions answered. And if you don't want to talk to Mike and you don't want to talk to Ed, you can call the city's main line and ask to talk to somebody else about the lighting and landscape district issues, and they would be more than happy to try to get you the right person to answer those questions as well. So with that, we're going to bring it to a close. I again thank the community for participating in this conversation and engaging in civic discourse and discussion and asking these excellent questions. My thanks to all the panel of experts that were here tonight to help talk about this important issue that's super important to this local neighborhood. And with that, keep your eyes peeled in the mail for your ballots, and feel free to ask more questions. Have a good night, Hercules.